Welcome all. Welcome to today's conversation with Dirk Beveridge. My name is Lindsay Young, and I'm the president of Three Aspens Media. Three Aspens Media, we help businesses, primarily in distribution markets, tell their stories and share their expertise. I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into this conversation today. For those of you listening live, you can keep your video and audio off, but we still want to hear from you. If you have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat down below, right where Dirk just welcomed you. We'll either ask those as we get them, or we'll leave time for Q&A at the end, or both. For those listening on our podcast, Attract, Engage, and Grow, or on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. Let's go ahead and jump in. Breaking through the noise today is hard, and it's only going to get harder with the rise of AI tools as contributors to content creation. To differentiate your sales and marketing content, you need to infuse real life examples, real people, and real personality into your articles, videos, imagery, and messaging. And so we hope that after today, after our conversation with Dirk, you're going to be inspired to embrace authenticity as a path to connect with prospects and customers. Dirk Beveridge, if you don't know him, is the founder of UnleashWD, and he's the executive producer of We Supply America. Thank you for joining us, Dirk.
Lindsay, I'm thrilled. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. Well, let's give the folks some background. You are the executive producer of We Supply America. Let's talk about what that means. Okay. You just completed season 3 of traveling across the country in your RV, visiting distributors, listening to their stories. And you also produce 8 films out of your tour each year, which are well worth checking out at WeSupplyAmerica.net. So what inspired you to create We Supply America?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Lindsay. So the story behind what inspired me to do it. So, everybody, if you can think about, at the onset of the pandemic, right? Government came out and said, go home for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And then that 2 weeks to flatten the curve became, we're entering the second year. Somewhere between the 2 weeks and the 2 years, I wrote an open letter to distributors called Shift to Tomorrow. And the purpose of that was to lift our eyes to the horizon, to help us think about individually and our companies, what do we need to do to come out of that pandemic stronger than we went in? And Lindsay, in that open letter was the first time that I used the words, the noble calling of distribution. And it wasn't premeditated. I never used those words before. So I had to stop and think about what I meant by that. And so you get to really think about the essentialness of distribution to our society. And man, it is noble as all get out, right? And so $7 trillion or an $8 trillion economic engine, the third largest economic engine on the planet, creates over 6 million jobs that are meaningful, provide purpose and fulfillment for people. And everything in our world goes through the docks of distributors, right? And so I have this fundamental belief that not only is distribution noble, but the individuals within those businesses are doing noble work. And so one thing led to another. It started, I don't even know if you know this, Lindsay. My first idea was to go to 50 distributors in 50 days, in 50 states. That idea got trashed. And that morphed into what we do now, going across the country, creating these 8 documentary films and the like. And last thing I'll say is this has been the absolute most rewarding and the most difficult thing of my career. The most rewarding is the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people that I get to meet on the job where they work, to hear their stories and connect with them individually. It's just a unique opportunity that I'm blessed to have. The most difficult is I have never put together a 3-month tour before, the logistics and planning behind that. I've never produced a film before. Now we've produced 24 films. I literally saw death this summer when I was sideswiped by a truck on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Sleeping in Walmart parking lots and Cracker Barrels isn't the sexiest thing in the world. So there certainly are some challenges, but the journey has been absolutely amazing to uncover what I believe is the secret sauce of these independent family and employee-owned distribution businesses who truly are a force for good.
That's fantastic. And, you know, the thought that occurred to me while you were kind of talking about giving us that background, since today's topic is storytelling, you know, you're going through how large the distribution industry is, right? That
Yeah.
all of these products go through distributors to eventually land on our doorstep or the doorstep of the businesses that we frequent. And the challenge is, you think, this is a $8 trillion industry, but what does that really mean? And so it sounds like your mission was really to put a face
Yep.
to, you know, those big words.
Yeah. So, so two things, if you don't mind on that. Okay. So one, you talked about, you know, that how everything we have goes through these businesses, right? And Lindsay, last summer, I was in Monroe Township, New Jersey at L&R Distributors. And you know me, I've been in a lot of warehouses, a lot of distribution centers. But L&R Distributors is a distributor of cosmetics that goes into the cosmetic aisle of Kroger's and Publix and the like, right? Piggly Wiggly. And on that floor, I had an aha moment. I swear, I'm walking through it. Some of it's robotic driven there, and there's people, and I just stop. And what I saw, Lindsay, was a miracle. Truly a miracle. It should not be possible for someone who needs a tube of chapstick or eyeliner to be able to go to that Kroger store and get it. I mean, the steps, the complexity, the logistics, to get that little tube on that on that shelf when that individual needs and wants it, and you back that all the way up to the raw materials and the manufacturing. It's a miracle. It is a miracle what happens every day in these businesses. And so I find inspiration in that. And I find nobility and essentialness of it all. And
And when you boil it down, again, in the spirit of storytelling, to that tube of chapstick, like, oh, yeah, that had to somehow get to where it is on the shelf. Like, how did that happen? So, you know, just that little anecdote. So let's jump into storytelling. So storytelling, Dirk, oldest form of communication. It's the heart, like we just said, of everything that you do. So why do you believe reaching people through stories is, I guess, the most effective way to help them in the business world? Because really, you're speaking to other businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So, Lindsay, as I was thinking about our conversation today, yesterday, I think the last thing I did before I left the office is I Googled, I don't know why I Googled this, but this is what came to me. I Googled how to thread a needle. Okay. And Google served up 63,800,000 information sources on how to thread a needle in 0.33 seconds.
Whew.
Whoa.
That's a lot.
On how to thread a needle, right? And so I think that just is representative of the world we live in and the fact that information is a commodity. Information has been democratized. There's an overabundance of information. There's too much information. So the question becomes, in this world where information has been commoditized, how do those who want to communicate, how do they break through, right? And I think that's the power of storytelling. Two things, if you don't mind. In this world of information being commoditized, I don't believe information moves people to action. So if you're a seller, if you're a marketer, right, for example, our job is to move people to action. And I don't believe pure data, pure information is enough to do that. You know, you think about Martin Luther King, right? He didn't just give facts about inequality in our country. He built a story and a narrative that individuals could latch onto and could see themselves in that story. And it's that drove people to action, right? You know, I'm a big Apple fan. Steve Jobs didn't just talk about speeds and feeds, bits and bytes.
Mhm.
That's not enough to set yourself apart, to differentiate, or to move people to action. So he built a story and a narrative around creativity and thinking differently. So I think stories in this world of information commodity connects individuals emotionally so that they are compelled. So that they are compelled to act. So one, information I don't think moves people like stories does. And number two, as I said, information is a commodity. There's an overabundance of it, right? So, you know, one of the things I love to do,
Mhm.
Lindsay, is, you know, certainly before We Supply America, but now with 3 years of We Supply America, all of these stories and lessons and insights that I'm getting, I love to be invited by associations and companies to speak at their annual meetings and leadership meetings and emerging leaders meetings and the like, to share these stories. And the fact is, there's a lot of individuals like me who want to speak at these meetings, right? So how do you break through? How do you break through? Well, it wasn't on purpose, but this is what has, you know,
Yeah.
We Supply America is one large story that is different. It's unique. It's authentic. It puts the viewer at the center of these breakthroughs so that people can relate to it. And these stories like We Supply America and other, they, in this age where information is a commodity, it's the stories that breaks through the clutter, the noise that's out there, and then has the added benefit of connecting emotionally with the individual.
Thank you. And you've kind of covered some of the thoughts I was just thinking about. You know, I think telling someone's story is really just about, you know, going beyond the surface, really uncovering their motivations, adding color and
Yep.
context to make it
Yeah.
more relevant, relatable, engaging. Like I said before, just really putting a face to that issue or challenge or pain point, or, you know, inspiration, right?
Yeah.
Providing inspiration, like you said, to move people to action.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, and I think, you know, stories to move people to action, to put this face, as you say.
Mhm.
I think the best stories, from a marketing perspective or else,
Yeah.
they're designed to get people to think differently, right? I mean, when you can provide a context in the form of a story
Mhm.
that individuals can personally relate to, you by default are going to get them, because they're personalizing it, you're going to get them thinking differently. They are going to place themselves in the center of that story, right? And so it helps them see the world, see their job, see their challenges, see the opportunities in front of them differently, because we've brought a new context to them. And I think stories, to your point, I think stories help people uncover new truths. You know, Lindsay, one of the things, season 1 that I came away with is what I call these false narratives, right? Throughout distribution. And what's a narrative is a story. And there's stories out there being told that I think are false. Distribution isn't sexy. I think it's a false narrative. How do you get people to think about that? Well, you tell stories about how people's lives have been lifted because they're employed in the warehouse or in marketing from a distributor, right? So it gets them to think differently and uncover new truths as well. I hope that made sense.
100% makes sense. So, you have really gone deeply over the last couple of years into critical topics like, building a stronger culture, through doubling down on your family culture, for example, or transforming your approach to leadership. Now, these are phrases that maybe could become white noise, right? Without those moments or stories that you're bringing into the conversation, right? These are powerful, powerful ideas, and that you're making them stick with moments that occur. So if you guys haven't seen the films that Dirk has put out from these last few seasons of We Supply America, please go to wesupplyamerica.net to check them out and experience some of these moments for yourself. But, he'll talk about a certain, topic, right? And then someone in the film, for example, and Dirk, you can talk about this further, will share their own personal story, and then suddenly, wham, that idea or that concept or that point that you were making just sticks, right? Like just like, I have a lot of memories of different parts of your films where I'm like, I do remember that, and I remember what he said about that, and that's what I remember. I don't necessarily remember what came right before or after, but I remember the point that was made with that story. So I guess talk about those moments and the importance of those moments to, I guess, what we're talking about.
Yeah, so thanks. I really appreciate that. And so again, you brought some of them up. Lindsay, when I started We Supply America, right? I remember it was Memorial Day of 2021.
Yes.
Okay, and that's when I started. And so I'm up in a KOA outside of Detroit, getting ready to film our first film the next day. And so that Memorial Day night, Jordan and Josh, our two videographers, our director, came and met. We met for the first time in person up there. And we're riffing, we're talking about what's going to happen and the excitement of it. And they pull out their camera and they start talking to me. And they say, well, Dirk, what do you expect? What do you expect? And I said, on camera, I said, honestly, I have no idea. I don't know what we're going to discover.
Yeah.
Right? Which is why it's important to go out and be curious and discover what makes these businesses so damn noble. And what I have discovered is, I believe, profound and important. And you ticked off some of them, right? Not only that these businesses are essential and noble, but I've discovered that people first cultures are real. They're out there in the heartland of America. It's anti-business narrative that you see on the nightly news. And people first cultures not only is real, but they're thriving businesses, right? I've learned that family cultures, despite what New York Times best-selling authors and major associations talk about, they're real. And it's important for our society and for employees to know that there's an option out there to go and devote a third of your life, your work, to a place that truly cares about you, that embraces you, that connects with you, that has your best interest at heart. And dare I say, that loves you. Mm-hmm. And so I've seen this, right? I've seen these and more out there on the We Supply America tour. So to your point, family culture, people first, what does it mean? Right? We can give data and the like, but what does it mean? It's like, if you have some salespeople or marketers listening here, right? Mm-hmm. When you get in front of the customer and you say, we, are known for our on-time delivery, or we're known for great customer service. What does that mean?
Does that
That's
mean?
noise. It's noise. So to make that meaningful, I have found the best way to do this, tell a story, right? To tell a story about that on-time delivery, about that great customer service, how you, anyway, and so the same thing is true with what I found on We Supply America. So, yeah. So, and I got some examples if you want, or.
Well, I'm remembering the moment, was it Rich on the warehouse floor in that film? And this is an ESOP, and you're talking to him about the employee ownership in the company. And can you remind me what he did in the film that just kind of like just showed the buy-in that this team had to the organization?
Yeah, and so I'll even back up a little bit.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So one of another thing that I discovered on the We Supply America tour is, Lindsay, as I said, when I go into these distribution centers now, I've been in a lot of warehouse distribution centers, as we said, but I get there and there's racks and I don't see the product on the shelves anymore. I don't. It's all that is noise to me.
Yeah.
What I see are the people, right? The people, in this case, on those warehouse floors, and how they are treated in these DSGs of the world, an employee-owned company or a family-owned company, an independent. And what I've discovered is that at their essence, one of the things these businesses are platforms for the personal and the professional growth of human beings, of people, of individuals. They don't just pick, pack, and ship. They are platforms for the personal, professional development of human beings and fulfillment. So with that, what does that mean, Dirk?
Right.
Well, what that means is when I had a chance to meet Rich at DSG, who's a transfer manager who has a team of 4 individuals that he works with to transfer the product from the distribution center out to the branches, if you will. We're talking about the ESOP. We're talking about the fact that he works for an employee-owned company and that he is an owner.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean? Well, what that means is, in the film, you'll see Rich just has this moment of revelation, which, by the way, stories lead people to moments of revelation,
Right,
of insight. And Rich just steps to the camera and looks high and low around the distribution center. And he puts his arms out like this and he says, yeah, this is my world. I created this.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are these businesses? They're a platform so that individuals like Rich can grow and develop personally, professionally, and live fulfilled lives. Mm-hmm. And man, that story of Rich coming to that revelation, that's how you get people to move.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. So, Dirk, you and I talk a lot. And one thing that comes up when we're working on crafting your stories is the idea of a hero's journey. And you've kind of alluded to this a few times so far in this conversation. So can you just talk a little bit about what the hero's journey is and how you apply it to what you do?
How much time you got?
Maybe not enough, but that's
okay. Lindsay, and thanks. And you cut me off if need be, okay? Because I love this topic. I do think it's transformative, and I think it's essential for all sales and marketers to understand. And by the way, I think it's essential for us as human beings to understand as we go through this thing called life, if you don't mind. And so the hero's journey. The hero's journey is a concept and a framework developed by a gentleman by the name of Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell has passed, but Joseph Campbell was a writer, a philosopher, and a professor who has studied every religion that has been, on earth, if you will. He's studied myths, if you will. And he has studied how society throughout time has been structured around storytelling. And what he's discovered is that all meaningful stories, again, think about this, stories have structured society, right? And so what he found is that all meaningful stories follow the same framework that he calls the hero's journey. So you think about stories, like one of my favorite myths is Hercules' choice. Or you study the story of Jesus and Buddha. You study the story of the founding of our country. You study the story of We Supply America. Study the story of Star Wars. And what you find, what Joseph Campbell has found, is that essentially all of those are the same story in a different setting and in a different context. And that story is the story of the hero's journey. So what is that? If you study it, I think there's like 12 or 13 different steps of this journey. I'll boil it down, okay? I think we can all relate to Star Wars. Think about Star Wars. Luke Skywalker was at home on his farm. The world was just rosy, man. Things were good. And then one day, Darth Vader arrives on the scene. So Luke Skywalker is called from his normal, peaceful world. He's called to adventure. Key step in the hero's journey. We are called to adventure. And we are always reluctant to go because we don't believe in ourselves. We're too busy. We don't know what the next step is. So we're reluctant to go. But in the hero's journey, we do answer that call to adventure and we cross the chasm into this unknown world. In this unknown world, we face challenges. It is not an easy path. And we face these challenges that that potentially can take us down. And so Luke meets Darth Vader. He's taken down. But thank God along the way, another key step of the hero's journey is once you cross the chasm, not only will you face challenges, but you will find a mentor. You will find individuals who are going to help you figure out your next step. And because of that mentoring, Luke Skywalker figures it out. He ultimately defeats Darth Vader, right? And the world is saved. But the hero's journey is not over. He then goes back to his farm, to that world that he left. And here's the key. The hero always shares their newfound wisdom with society, with others, to better society and to move society forward. So that, in a nutshell, is the hero's journey. And when you think about all great stories, real life stories, Buddha, Jesus, right? Myths, Hercules, real life stories like the founding of our country, you can actually trace that around. So when we are telling stories on stage, when we're speaking to companies, in our films with We Supply America, we always have that hero's journey in mind. And I think here's the lesson for us. Okay, Lindsay? I think the lesson for us here is that, let's boil it down to today. Let's not talk about Luke Skywalker. I think what we can take from this right now, from a sales and marketing perspective, is that the hero's journey tells us that great stories lead people to a transformation. great stories are going to show that change, betterment, improvement is possible, right? And so let's go back to the example I gave earlier, right? About sales reps saying on-time delivery. I've got the best on-time delivery. Well, it's noise. All right, let's think about the hero's journey. What's the story that we can tell about another customer who the world was fine, and then one day there was a supply chain issue?
Yes, and lots of that happening in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and so he has to cross the chasm, that call to adventure, to figure things out. And it just so happens that our company was that mentor. And so what we did with this contractor is we pulled them into a makeshift war room, and we broke down his project, his 6-month project, down into phases. And what we decided was that he could potentially, if he's late on delivery of that project, get up to $500,000 in fines. Well, not good, right? So let's talk about the story we walked them through in that war room to completely rethink how they're going to do the work on that job, if you will, to save it. So it's about the transformation.
It's about the transformation. And what I just love that. I think it's fantastic. There's a great book out there as well that kind of incorporates this idea called Story Brand. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
And kind of the whole idea behind it is that businesses often make the story all about themselves. Like you said, we have great customer service. Our people are the best, all of those things, right? Which all may be true, but the customer doesn't really care. So the idea is to make the customer the hero of your messaging, the hero of the stories that you're telling. So if you're saying you have great customer service, which is a great example because everyone says that, what the heck does that mean for the customer? Tell stories about what that means for them. Make them see that you understand them and that your business is there for them. It's not about you. It's about making the customer the hero of your story, of those messages.
Without question. And I'm just going to repeat what you said, right? But yes. In our sales and marketing efforts, we always put the customer at the center of the story. That's the thinking we got. How do we make that customer, how do we make that prospect the hero of this journey that they're on? Because they are on a hero's journey.
Yes.
And so how do we message? How do we get those stories? How do we get those case studies? How do we get close enough to these customers to truly understand what is that chasm that they're trying to cross? What is that call to adventure that they're in the midst of, right? And knowing that they need a mentor, knowing that they need a Yoda, if you will. And so how do we position ourselves as the Yoda, but make them the hero?
This conversation is making me want to go back and watch the Star Wars movies. So Dirk, I joined you on one of your stops, your last one this year, actually, IS Industrial here in the Denver area. And what kind of really hit me about that visit, watching you in action, doing what you do, is how you pull stories out of people when you're in person. You really get to the heart of what really makes a person tick, right? Or what motivates them. And I think that skill doesn't really come naturally to everyone. I think it's a skill that I guess you could call it an interviewing skill. It takes time to hone. So, and maybe you aren't going to be able to put into words the magic that you make on those stops when you're able to pull all these, pretty personal, really telling stories out of people to really show the story of the company. But I'm going to give it a shot anyways. So what would your advice be to people who want to better share their story or get to the heart of their customer stories?
Yeah, great question. And, I love the concept of unique ability, and unique ability is something, it says that we're great at something and we might not see our greatness at it, right? Because it just comes naturally. And I
Yeah.
think this is one of the examples of, I think this comes somewhat naturally to me, but let me try to break it down. Okay, Lindsay?
Yep.
First, when I'm on site, there's always some form of agenda. Maybe it's with the production crew as we're creating the films. Maybe it's a 4-hour stop like you were there, right? But there's always some type of a time schedule. And Lindsay, I think you saw when you were with me that it wasn't 30 minutes into the call that we're behind schedule.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
And it always happens. And I drive people crazy. And I'm the reason we're always running late.
Yeah.
But why is that? It's because I have a real desire to meet people. And, you know, I hope my wife isn't watching right now, but, you know, I dislike the typical, let's go over to some friend's house on a Friday night and, you know, and have a conversation. Why? Because I don't know. What I find is we're regurgitating the same damn things, you know, that we've talked about for the last 20 years. I just don't like it. What I like is meaningful conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you get to meet people for the first time or not, there's opportunities for depth and meaningful conversation. So I think there's 3 or 4 things that I would say, okay, on that. Number one, I think I used the word earlier, be curious. Be curious. And here's what I keep telling myself, and I tell others this, and every person, everyone has a story. And it's an important story. And be curious to know and want to uncover that person who you're interacting with, that untold story. One of my favorite podcasts over the years has been 99% Invisible. It's great. Think about the title of that, 99% Invisible. What it says is whenever you see something like lawns is an episode, or revolving doors is an episode. Whenever you see something, you only see 1% of the story. You think you see it all. But 99% of the story of how lawns became lawns and how revolving doors became revolving doors, 99% of that story is invisible. You have to be curious. You have to want to think deeper behind it. So same thing with people. What you see is only 1%. 99% of that person's story is invisible. And I love uncovering that by being curious. Second is I think you got to care, right? You got to care. You know, when you're calling on a purchasing agent, that's not a purchasing agent, that's a human being. You know, when you're calling on a plant manager, that's not a plant manager, that's a human being. And you absolutely have to care about humanity and people and individuals. There was Plato who said, be kind to everyone, for everyone is fighting a battle.
I love that.
So care about the individual as an individual. You said it, put them at the center of the conversation. It's all about them and not you. Make them the hero. Third, I'll say, and I think I've alluded to it, is humanity. Right, Lindsay, one of the things I've discovered that I love to do and people relate to very, very well, which surprised me at first, is when I see people tatted up, I don't have any tattoos. When I see people tatted up with one tattoo or all over, you want to learn about somebody.
Yes.
Acknowledge that you notice their tattoos. And to me, I like to ask, do you have a favorite? Guess what they say? Yes. Right? Yeah, I do. And then they'll tell about this rose about their grandmother, or how it signifies the loss of their brother or sister to suicide. You hear it all. You hear it all. And so there's that. And then the last thing I'll say is authentic, right? You don't engage with people as a tool, as a framework. You engage with people if you authentically want to understand where they're at in their hero's journey and what they're thinking today. And if you authentically want to know that, everybody has a story and they want to talk about it. Last thing, Lindsay, I didn't know this would happen. I can't do you remember what happened at AIS? I'm talking to some guys about tattoos, right? And Dale came over with his phone, and he's not the only one, right? And took pictures of the tattoo. And as we're leaving, I asked, why'd you do that? And he says, I never heard that story before. I didn't know that about him, right? And so it's really interesting to me how often on the We Supply America tour, somebody, after I've interacted with somebody, says something similar. I never knew that. They've been with us for 20 years. I didn't know that about their family. But man, right? So curious, care, look for the humanity in people, and authentically want to connect with another human being. By the way, I think it makes our world better, and you can sell more products.
I agree. And I want to add two things to that. One is, you're telling a lot of personal, more personal stories. They're connected to work, why they're there, why they love that company, and so on and so forth, that tend to be more personal. But what you're saying applies whether someone is talking in the context of the work they do or in their personal life, right? It's all connected. This is whether you're writing a story about how your customer service is great, there's still a lot of elements there, a lot of things that you can dive into that can work with the framework that you just outlined. The other thing that I wanted to add to that is, and this is something you're really good at and something I've learned to do over the years as I've interviewed, hundreds of executives, is to be okay with silence in those conversations. I think oftentimes if you are asking and are authentic and are having a conversation, a lot of times it's really tempting to fill that white space, that silence. But if you're okay with sitting in it with them and letting them speak next, oftentimes that's where some of the most profound revelations happen and the best, stories come from. So those are my only two additions. It sounds like you had something to add to.
No, I would agree with it. Where you got me thinking is, with that silence, what leads up to that, right? But then with that silence, I never thought about it this way. So thank you. You get me thinking here, Lindsay. So I'll frame it as a question for us. Does that silence allow for the enhancement of trust? Because in that moment of silence, what I'm demonstrating, what I'm showing is a true concern, is a true care to understand deeper and more fully, rather than thinking it's about me that I have to add, right? So I never thought about it that way. What do you think on that? Do you think it's something that enhances trust between the individuals when you do sit in that silence?
Yeah, I think so. You're making it, this sounds transactional the way I say it, but I don't mean it in a transactional way. You make it about them. So as long as you're that silence, we could get really nitty gritty here, but if that silence is obviously them thinking or sitting in the emotion or feeling that they just expressed, right? Rather than jumping right in and moving on when they're not maybe quite ready to move on. I think it does enhance that trust between you and them because you're there for them,
Yeah, agreed.
So.
Sounds like something that we could think about deeper.
Yes.
Yeah,
Should we sit in silence for a little bit about that?
Yeah, I know. And the other thing that I was going to add, you had said something about the connection and the like, and Lindsay, this whole journey that I've been on, since 2020 has really been centered on 4 words that I think are important words, and I think connects to what you said just a moment ago. As the pandemic came on, Bethany, Bethany, our great
Yes.
partner of mine, and we over Zoom, we said, what the heck are we going to do? And 4 words came to the forefront. And we said, what we think people are going to need as the world closes down is 4 things: insight, inspiration, connectedness, and a hug.
Mm.
And I think that's part of the authenticity. I think that's part of the caring. I think that's part of the curiosity of connecting with people, right? Is how can we, in our storytelling, give just the right amount of insight, not to solve their entire problem all the time, but just to get them to make that next step? How can we inspire them to think differently, to believe differently, to see a new path forward? How can we connect with the individual to say that, I see you? Which, by the way, I think is one of the brilliant things of these independent family and employee-owned distribution businesses is they see their people.
Mm-hmm.
They hear their people. They are connected to their people. And how can we hug our prospects? How can we hug our customers and say, you know what? We're in this together. And I have this deep concern for you. Yes, as a purchasing agent, yes, as a plant manager, but as a human being, as a person. So maybe there's 4 words that we can think about too as we, become this master storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
Insight, inspiration, connectedness, and a hug.
I love it. So I know we're getting close to the top of the hour here, but I have a big question for you. Maybe I don't know if it's playing the devil's advocate at all. Maybe an anti-argument, which is, I think, a phrase you like to use as well.
Yeah.
There's so much content out there today. We're talking about deep stories and conversations and telling these stories, but there's a lot of people out there who just want to skim, right? They just want to get a quick answer. So how would you respond to the idea that nobody has time to read or hear about someone's story today, in this world of information overload?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. But I also think that it's not an absolute truth, right?
Right.
Last weekend, I sat through and enjoyed a 3-hour-long movie, Oppenheimer.
Oh,
right?
Nice.
3 hours, and it seemed like it was 20 minutes, right?
Wow. Yeah.
And so I think length of the article, length of the story is important. I think it's part of the formula, if you will. But I think mostly important is the connection and the relevance.
Mm-hmm.
If you are relevant in 30 seconds or 3 hours, if you can connect to that viewer, that reader in 30 seconds or 3 hours, right? If you can inspire, provide just the right amount of insight without overwhelm, if you can connect to them in 30 minutes or 3 hours, I think let's start there and then say, what's the right length? Does that make sense?
Right.
And so, I look at, not all stories have to be a 3-hour epic like Oppenheimer.
Right.
You look at the influencers on Instagram. They're telling stories in 15-second bites.
Mm-hmm. That's
right?
right.
And it's not only in their words, but it's in the visuals, it's in the movement, it's pulling you in to that story in 15-second increments, right? You and I talked about off camera, when I think about this, I think about Steve Jobs again and his Think Different campaign, right? I mean, he had 30 or 60 seconds. How long is that Think Different commercial, right? That's a story that puts you in the center to say, do you want to associate yourself as being a creative, right? In 30 seconds or 60 seconds. So it can be done, but I don't want to lose sight that time is just one element of it. What's really important is your connection and the relevance, I think, of what you're sharing.
Thank you, Dirk.
Yeah.
So we have a few questions to throw out here. I'm going to ask this first one that came in through chat. I'm going to go ahead and read through it. I think it's important I read the full thing. So storytelling is the oldest form of communication throughout civilization. It's how we share tradition, warn of dangers, highlight triumphs. Why do you think it got lost in the modern business world? So she says Wall Street versus Main Street.
So here's my visceral reaction. I don't think it did get lost.
Okay.
I think stories and narratives are still winning the day. They just so happen to be the wrong stories and the wrong narratives, right? The narrative, if you watch the news, is that business is all about New York and Wall Street and San Francisco and Silicon Valley, right? That's the narrative. Well, come with me, come to AIS in Denver, right? And what you can find is that there are other narratives out there. And that's what we're trying to tell with the We Supply America tour. And Lindsay, God, I don't even know what I'm about to say, but let me try here. I think this is such an important question. And I think it's an important question from a sales and marketing perspective, from a 3 Aspens perspective, with the great service that you provide me and my team and others. We couldn't provide the content we do without you all. So thank you to you and your team for that amazing help that you provide to us. But here is something. We have to take ownership. Sorry, now I might go down the rabbit hole, but
Go ahead. Yep.
I think we need to take ownership of the narrative in this country. If we wait for the narrative to change out of Wall Street, it ain't going to happen. If we wait for the narrative to change out of Washington, D.C., it ain't going to happen. All right. If we wait for the narrative to change out of our state capitals in each of our 50 states, it ain't going to happen. Where's the narrative where's the narrative? I have come to the undeniable, unquestionable truth that businesses can be and are a force for good. But we don't hear that narrative. We hear everything else out of Washington, D.C. Look at what our President Joe Biden is doing. Right or wrong, what he's doing is he's going up to Detroit to get on the line with the UAW. He's sharing a narrative that business is bad. He's sharing a narrative that business is holding employees down. Now, I don't want to argue what's going on up in Detroit. But what I will share with you is that ain't the right narrative. The right narrative is when you go to Porter Pipe and you see Harold, an 83-year-old individual who has been with this company for the last 30 years. And there's real love in that family and respect to the point that they named a building after him. It's when you go see Rich, who walks out there and says, yeah, this is my world. Or it's where you go up to Madison, Wisconsin, and you see this independent business in Palmer Johnson, whose vision statement says they're in the business to inspire growth, health, and well-being in our people and the communities we serve. That's the narrative of being a force for good. And so I think we collectively have the opportunity, and dare I say, Lindsay, we have the responsibility to tell these stories
Mhm.
to change that narrative that the question asked about.
I'm not sure we can add to that, Dirk. That was wonderful. Feel like that's a really great place to stop. The
Does that
one
mean I
thing,
talk too much?
no, not at all. That was perfect. I feel like that perfectly wraps up kind of the opportunity that distributors have. They're very humble. Most distributors I've ever met are really humble. Keep your head down, work hard, help your customers. But I think there's a big opportunity to better tell their stories and to tell the stories of their customers and how they are a force for good in their communities. So
Yeah.
I think that's the perfect way to wrap it up.
Cool.
So thank you so much for joining us, Dirk. If
Lizzie,
anyone
thank you.
on the call or anyone that listens to this has any follow-up questions, you can reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to connect you with Dirk for a follow-up. Have a wonderful rest of your day, Dirk, and thank you again.